Hello students, welcome to the PD Life Science Academy for the Happy Learning. NEET एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन जे विद्यार्थी करत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी बेसिक कन्सेप्ट लर्निंग आणि लिंकिंग ऑफ कन्सेप्ट हे जेवढे गरजेचे आहे तेवढेच NCERT बुकमधील चॅप्टरचे कंटेंट रीड करणे आवश्यक आहे. हे करत असताना फक्त एक रीडिंग करून चालणार नाही, मल्टिपल टाइम्स रिव्हिजन होणे गरजेचे आहे. यात टाळाटाळ करणे चांगले नव्हे. आपण सेट केलेले टार्गेट अचीव करण्यासाठी PD लाईफ सायन्स अकॅडमीने सर्व स्टुडंटसाठी जे नीट एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन करीत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी 21 डे रीडिंग चॅलेंजची सुरुवात केली आहे. रोज एका चॅप्टरचे रीडिंग आपण कंप्लीट करणार आहोत. हे चॅलेंज ज्या विद्यार्थ्यांनी ॲक्सेप्ट केले आहे त्यांनी त्यांचे डेली टार्गेट अचीव केल्यावर कॉमेंट करून सांगायचे आहे. सो लेट्स गेट रेडी फॉर टेकिंग रीडिंग चॅलेंज. ऑल द व्हेरी बेस्ट. थँक यू.
21 day biology reading challenge, day 18 reading challenge, chapter number 18 from NCERT biology textbook of 11th standard. The name of chapter is the body fluid and the circulation. You have learned that all living cells have to provide with the nutrients, oxygen and other essential substances. Also the waste or the harmful substances produces have to remove the continuously for the healthy functioning of the tissues. It is therefore essential to have the efficient mechanism for the movement of these substances to the cell and from the cell. Different groups of animals have evolved different methods for this transport. Simple organisms like the sponges, coleodontines circulate the water from their surrounding through their body cavities to facilitate the cells to exchange these substances. More complex organisms use special fluid with their bodies to transport such material. Blood is the most commonly used body fluid by most of the higher organisms, including the humans, for this purpose. Another body fluid is a lymph, also help in the transport of the certain substances. In this chapter, you will learn about the composition and the properties of the blood and the lymph, that is the tissue fluid, and the mechanism of the circulation of the blood is also explained herein. Now 18.1 is a blood. Blood is a special connective tissue consisting of the fluid matrix, plasma and form the elements. 18.1.1 is a plasma. Plasma is a straw-colored viscous fluid constituting the nearly 55% of the blood. 92% of the plasma is water and the protein contribute the 6 to 8% of it. Fibrinogen, globulin and the albumin are the major proteins. Fibrinogen are needed for the clotting or a coagulation of the blood. Globulin primarily are involved in the defense mechanism of the body and the albumin helps in the osmotic balance. Plasma also contains the small amount of the minerals like the sodium, calcium, magnesium, carbonate, chloride, etc. Glucose, amino acid, lipids, etc. are also present in the plasma as they are always in the transit in the body. The factors in the coagulation or clotting of the blood are also present in the plasma in an inactive form. The plasma without the clotting factor is called as a serum. 18.1.2 is a form element. Erythrocyte, leukocyte and platelet are collectively called formed element, and they are constitute nearly 45% of the blood. Erythrocyte or a red blood cell, that is the RBCs, are almost abundant of the all cells in a body in blood. A healthy adult man has on an average of the 5 million to the 5.5 million of the RBCs millimeter per cube of the blood. RBCs are formed in a red bone marrow in the adult, and RBCs are divided of the nucleus is a most of the mammalian and are biconcave in a shape. They have the red color iron containing complex protein called as a hemoglobin, hence the color and the name of these cells. The healthy individual has the 12 to 16 grams of the hemoglobin in every 100 ml of the blood. These molecules play a significant role in a transport of the respiratory gases. RBCs have the average lifespan of the 120 days, after which they are destroyed in a spleen or a graveyard of the RBCs. The leukocytes are also known as the white blood cells or WBCs, as they are colorless due to the lack of the hemoglobin. They are nucleated and are relatively lesser in a number, which average 6,000 to 8,000 mm per cube of the blood. Leukocytes are generally short-lived. We have two main categories of WBCs, granulocyte and agranulocyte. Neutrophils, eosinophils and basophils are the different types of the granulocyte, while the lymphocyte and the monocytes are the agranulocytes. The neutrophils are most abundant in the cell, 60 to 65% of the total WBCs, and the basophils are the least, that is the 0.5 to 1% among them. The neutrophils and the monocytes are the 6 to 8%, and the phagocytes cells which destroy the foreign organisms entering the body. The basophils secrete the histamine, serotonin, heparin, etc. and are involved in the inflammatory reactions. The eosinophils, the 2 to 3%, resist the infection and are also associated with the allergic reaction, that is the lymphocyte 20 to 25% are of the two major types, B and the T forms. Both the B and the T lymphocytes are responsible for the immune responses of the body. The platelets are also called as a thrombocyte, are the cell fragments produced from the megakaryocyte, special cell in the bone marrow. The blood normally contains the 1,50,000 to the 3,50,000 platelets millimeter per cube. Platelet can release a variety of the substances, most of which are involved in the coagulation or a clotting of the blood. The reduction in their number can lead to clotting disorders, which will lead to excessive loss of the blood from the body. Now the 18.1.3 is a blood group. As you know, the blood of the human being different in certain aspects, through it appears to be similar. Various type of grouping of the blood has been done. Two such grouping, the ABO and the RH, are widely used all over the world. 18.1.3.1 is ABO grouping. ABO grouping is based on the presence or absence of the two surface antigen or chemical that can induce the immune responses on the RBCs, namely A and the B. Similarly, the plasma of the different individuals contain the two natural antibodies the protein produces in response to the antigens. The distribution of the antigen and the antibodies in four groups of the blood, A, B, AB and the O, are given in table. You probably know that during the blood transfusion, the blood cannot be used, and the blood of the donor has to be carefully matched with the blood of a recipient before any blood transfusion, to avoid the severe problem of the clumping, that is the destruction of the RBCs. The donor compatibility is also shown in the table. From the above mentioned table, it is evident that the group O blood can be donated to the person with any other blood group, and hence the O group individual are called as a universal donor. The person with the AB group can accept the blood from the person with the AB as well as the other groups of the blood. Therefore, such a person are called as a universal recipient. The 18.1.3.2 is the RH grouping. Another antigen, the RH antigen, similar to one person in a rhesus monkey, that hence called as a RH, is also observed on the surface of the RBCs of the majority, nearly 80% of the human. Such an individual are called as a RH positive. Those in whom with the antigen is absent is called as a RH negative. An Rh negative person, if exposed to the Rh positive blood, it forms the specific antibody against the Rh antigen. Therefore, the Rh group should also be matched before the transfusion. The special case of the Rh incompatibility, that is the mismatching, has been observed between the Rh positive blood of the pregnant mother with the Rh positive blood of the fetus. The Rh antigen of the fetus do not expose to the Rh negative blood of the mother in first pregnancy, as the two bloods are well separated by the placenta. However, during the delivery of the first child, there is a possibility of the exposure of the maternal blood to the small amount of the Rh positive blood from the fetus. In such cases, the mother starts the preparing the antibodies against the Rh antigen in her blood. In case of her subsequent pregnancies, the Rh antibodies from the mother Rh negative can leak into the blood of the fetus, that is the Rh positive, and destroy the fetus RBCs. This could be the fatal to the fetus or a child, cause the severe anemia and the jaundice to the baby. This condition is called as erythroblastosis fetalis. This can be avoided by the administering the anti-Rh antibodies to the mother immediately after the delivery of the first child. 18.1.4 is a coagulation of the blood. You know that when you cut your finger or hurt yourself, your wound does not continue to bleed for a long time. Usually the blood stops flowing after some time. Do you know why? The blood exhibits the coagulation and the clotting in response to an injury or a trauma. This is the mechanism to prevent the excessive loss of the blood from the body. You would have observed a dark reddish brown scum form at the site of the cut or an injury over a period of time. It is a clot or a coagulation form mainly of the network of the threads called as a fibrin, in which the dead or a damaged form element of the blood are trapped. The fibrins are formed by the conversion of an inactive fibrinogen in a plasma by enzyme thrombin. The thrombin in turn are formed from the another inactive substances present in a plasma called as a prothrombin. An enzyme complex thrombokinase is required for the above reaction. This complex is formed by the series of the linked enzymatic reaction, that is the cascade process, involve a number of the factors present in a plasma in the inactive state. An injury or a trauma stimulates the platelet in a blood to release the certain factors which activate the mechanism of the coagulation. Certain factors released by the tissues at the site of the injury also can initiate the regulation. Calcium ion play a very important role in clotting. 18.2 is a lymph or the tissue fluid. As the blood passes through the capillaries in the tissues, some water along with many small water soluble substances move out into the space between the cell of the tissues, leaving the large protein and the most of the form element in the blood vessels. This fluid release out is called as a interstitial fluid or a tissue fluid. It has the same mineral distribution as that of the plasma. Exchange of the nutrient, gases, etc. between the blood and the cell always occurs through this fluid. An elaborated network of the vessels called as a lymphatic system collects this fluid and drain it back to the major veins. The fluid present in the lymphatic system is called as a lymph, and lymph is a colorless fluid containing specialized lymphocytes which are responsible for the immune responses of the body. The lymph is also an important carrier for the nutrient, hormones, etc. The fats are absorbed through the lymph in the lacteal presence in the intestinal villi. The 18.3 is a circulatory pathways. The circulatory pattern are of the two type, open or closed. The open circulatory system is present in the arthropods and mollusks, in which the blood pumped by the heart passes through the large vessels into the open spaces or a blood cavities called as a sinuses. The annelid and the chordates have the closed circulatory system in which the blood pumped by the heart is always circulate through the closed network of the blood vessels. This pattern is considered to the more advantageous as the flow or a fluid can be more precisely regulated. All vertebrates possess the muscular chamber heart. The fishes have a two-chamber heart with an atrium and ventricles. The amphibian and the reptile, except the crocodile, have the three-chambered heart with a two atria and the single ventricle, whereas the crocodile, birds and the mammals possess the four-chambered heart with the two atria and the two ventricles. In fishes, the heart pumps out deoxygenated blood, which is oxygenated by the gills and supplied to the body parts and form, where the deoxygenated blood is return to the heart a single circulation. In an amphibian and reptiles, the left atrium receives the oxygenated blood from the gills and the lungs and the skin, and the right atrium gets the oxygenated blood from the other body parts. However, they get the mixed up in a single ventricle which pumps out mix the blood in complete double circulation. In a bird and the mammals, the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood received by the left and the right atrium respectively possess on the ventricle of the same sides. The ventricle pump it out without any mixing up, that is, the two separate circulatory pathways are present in these organisms. Hence, these organisms or animals have the double circulation. Let us study the human circulatory system. The 18.3.1 is the human circulatory system. Human circulatory system, also called as a blood vascular system, consists of the muscular chamber heart, network of the close branching blood vessel and the blood. The fluid which is the circulated heart, the mesodermally derived organ, is situated in the thoracic cavity in between the two lungs, the slightly tilted to the left. It has the size of the clenched fist. It is protected by the double wall membrane back, pericardium enclosing the pericardial fluid. Our heart has a four chamber, two relatively small upper chamber called as atria and the two large lower chambers called as a ventricle. A thin muscular wall called as a interatrial septum separate the right and the left atria, whereas the thick wall interventricular septum separate the left and the right ventricle. The atrium and the ventricles are the same sides, are also separated by the thick fibrous tissues called as atrioventricular septum. However, each of the septum are provided with the opening through which the two chambers of the same side are connected. The opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle are guarded by the wall formed by the three vascular flaps or a cups. The tricuspid wall, whereas the bicuspid or a mitral walls guarded the opening between the left atrium and the left ventricle. The opening of the right and the left ventricle into the pulmonary arteries and the aorta respectively are provided with the semilunar wall. The wall in the heart allows the flow of the blood only in the one direction and form the atria to the ventricles and form the ventricle to the pulmonary arteries and aorta. This wall present by the backflow prevent any backflow. The entire heart is made of the cardiac muscle. The wall of the ventricle are the much thicker than that of the atria. The specialized cardiac musculature called as the nodal tissues is also distributed in the heart. A patch of these tissues is present in the right upper corner of the right atrium called as a sinoatrioatrial atrial node, that is the SAN, and another mass of these tissues is seen in the lower left corner of the right atrium close to the atrioventricular septum called as the atrioventricular node, that is the AVN. The bundle of the node's fibers, atrioventricular bundle, that is the AV bundle, continue from the AVN, which passes through the atrioventricular septum to emerge on the top of the interventricular septum and immediately divides into the right and the left bundles. These branches gives rise to the minute fibers throughout the ventricular musculature of the respective side and are called as a Purkinje fibers. The nodal musculature has the ability to generate the action potential without any external stimuli. That is, it is the auto-excitable. However, the number of the action potential that could be generated in a minute vary at a different parts of the nodal system. The SAN can generate the maximum number of the action potential, that is the 70 to 75 minutes per minute, and is responsible for initiating the maintaining the rhythmic contraction activity of the heart. Therefore, it is called as a pacemaker. Our heart normally beats the 70 to 75 times in a minute, that is average 72 beats per minute. 18.3.2 is a cardiac cycle. How does the heart is function? Let us take a look. To begin with, all four chambers of the heart are in a relaxed state, that is, they are in a joint diastole. As the tricuspid and the bicuspid wall are open, the blood from the pulmonary veins and vena cava flows into the left and the right ventricle respectively through the left and the right atria. The semilunar wall are closed at this stage. The SAN now generates an action potential which stimulate both the atria to undergo the simultaneous contraction, the atrial systole, and this increase the flow of the blood into the ventricle by about the 30%. The action potential is conducted to the ventricular side by the AVN and the AV bundles from where the bundle of is transmitted in it through the entire ventricular musculature. This causes the ventricular musculature to contract the ventricular systole. The atria undergoes the relaxation or diastole coincide with the ventricular systole. The ventricular systole increases the ventricular pressure, causing the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid wall, and due to attempted backflow of the blood into the atria. The ventricular pressure increased the further, and semilunar wall guarded the pulmonary arteries right side and the aorta left side are forced open, allowing the blood into the ventricle to flow through these vessels into the circulatory pathways. The ventricle now relaxes the ventricular diastole and the ventricular pressure falls, causing the closure of the semilunar wall, which prevents the backflow of the blood into the ventricles. As the ventricular pressure declines the further, and the tricuspid and the bicuspid wall are the pushed open by the pressure in the atria exerted by the blood which was being emptied into them by the veins. The blood now once again move freely to the ventricles. The ventricles and the atria are now again a relaxed joint diastole state as earlier. Soon the SAN generate a new action potential, and the events described above are repeated in that of the sequences, and the processes continue. This sequential event in the heart, which is a cyclically repeated, called as a cardiac cycle, and it consists of the systole and the diastole, both of the atria and the ventricles. As mentioned earlier, the heart beats the 72 times per minute. That is that many cardiac cycles are performed per minute, and from this it could be deduced that duration of the cardiac cycle is 0.8 second. During the cardiac cycle, each ventricle pump out the approximately 70 ml of the blood is called as a stroke volume, and the stroke volume multiplied by the heart rate, number of the beat per minute gives the cardiac output. Therefore, the cardiac output can be defined the volume of the blood pumped out each of the ventricle per minute and the average of the 5000 ml or a 5 liter of the healthy individuals. The body has the ability to alter the stroke volume as well as the heart rate and thereby the cardiac output. For example, the cardiac output of the athletes will much higher than that of the ordinary man. During each cardiac cycle, two prominent sounds are produced which can easily heard through the stethoscope. The first heart sound is a loop is associated with the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid wall, whereas the second heart sound is a dupe is associated with the closure of the semilunar wall. And these sounds of the clinical diagnostic significance. Now 18.3.3 is a electrocardiograph, that is the ECG. You have probably similar with the scene from the typical hospital television show. The patient is hooked up the monitoring the machine that shows the voltage trace on the screen make the sound beep 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 as a patient goes into the cardiac arrest. And this type of the machine is a electrocardiograph is used to obtain the electrocardiogram, that is the ECG. ECG is a graphic representation of the electrical activity of the heart during the cardiac cycle. To obtain the standard ECG as shown in figure, the patient is connected to the machine with the 3 electrical leads, one to each wrist and to the left ankle, that continuously monitor the heart activity. For detailed evaluation of the heart's function, the multiple leads are attached to the chest region. Here we will talk only about the standard ECG. Each peak in the ECG is identified with the letter from the P and P to T that correspond a specific electrical activity of the heart. The P wave represent the electric excitation or a depolarization of the atria, which leads to the contraction of the both atria. The QRS complex represent the depolarization of the ventricles, which initiate the ventricular contraction. The contraction starts shortly after the Q and marks the beginning of the systole. The T wave represent the return of the ventricle from the excited to the normal state, that is the repolarization. The ends of the T wave marks the end of the systole. Obviously, by continuing the number of the QRS complex that occurs in the given time period, and one can determine the heartbeats rates of the individual. Since the ECG obtained from the different individuals have roughly the same shape for the given lead configuration, any deviation from the shape indicates the possible abnormality or a diseases. Hence it is of the great clinical significance. Now the 18.4 is a double circulation. The blood flow strictly by the fixed route through the blood vessels, the atria and the veins. Basically, each atria and the veins consist of the 3 layers: an inner lining of the squamous endothelium, the tunica intima, a middle layer of the smooth muscles and the elastic fibers, the tunica media, and the external layer of the fibrous connective tissues which with the collagen fibers, the tunica externa. The tunica media is comparatively thin in the veins. As mentioned earlier, the blood pumps by the right atrium ventricle enters the pulmonary arteries, whereas the left ventricle pumps the blood into the aorta. Deoxygenated blood pump into the pulmonary arteries is passed on the lungs, from where the oxygenated blood is carried by the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. This pathway constitutes the pulmonary circulation. The oxygenated blood entering the aorta is carried by the network of the arterioles and the capillaries to the tissues, from where the deoxygenated blood is collected by the system of the veins and the vena cava and emptied into the right atrium. This is the systemic circulation. The systemic circulation provides the nutrient, oxygen and the other essential substances to the tissues, take the CO2 and the other harmful substances away for the elimination. The unique vascular connective exists connections exist between the digestive tract and the liver called as the hepatic porter system, and the hepatic porter veins carried the blood from the intestine to the liver before it is delivered to the systemic circulation. A special coronary system of the blood vessel is present in our body exclusively for the circulation of the blood to and from the cardiac musculature. Now the 18.5 is a regulation of the circulatory cardiac activity. Normal activity of the heart are the regulated intrinsically, that is the auto-regulated by the specialized muscle, that is the nodal tissues, and hence the heart is called as a myogen. The special neural center in the medulla oblongata can moderate the cardiac function through the automatic nervous system, that is the ANS. The neural signals through the lymphatic nerves, that is the part of the ANS, can increase the rate of the heartbeat, the strength of the ventricle contraction, and thereby the cardiac output. On the other hand, the parasympathetic neural signals and another component of the ANS decrease the rate of the heartbeat, speed of the conduction of the action potential, and thereby the cardiac output. Adrenal medullary hormones can also increase the cardiac output. Disorder of the circulatory system, the high blood pressure, that is the hypertension. Hypertension is a term for the blood pressure that is the higher than the normal, that is the 120 to 80. In this measure, 120 mm Hg, that is the millimeter mercury pressure, is a systolic, and the pumping pressure and the 80 millimeter Hg is the diastolic or a resting pressure. If repeated checks of the blood pressure of an individual is a 140/90, 140/90 or a higher, it shows the hypertension or high blood pressure leads to the heart diseases and also affect the vital organs like the brain and the kidney. Coronary artery disease, that is the CAD, coronary artery disease, often refers to as the atherosclerosis, affect the vessels that supply the blood to the heart muscles, and it is caused by the deposits of the calcium, fats, cholesterol, and the fibrous tissues, which makes the lumen and atria narrower. The angina, it is also called as the angina pectoris. The symptoms of the acute chest pain appears when no enough oxygen is reaching the heart muscle. The angina can occur in a man and the woman at any age, but it is more common among the middle age and the elderly. It occurs due to the condition that affects the blood flow. The heart failure. Heart failure means the state of the heart when it is not pumping blood effectively enough to meet the need of the body. It is sometimes called as a congestive heart failure because the congestion of the heart is one of the main symptoms of these diseases. The heart failure is not the same as a cardiac arrest when the heart stops beating, or a heart attack when the heart muscle is suddenly damaged by the inadequate blood supply. Now the summary of the body fluid and the circulation. The vertebrates circulate the blood, a fluid connective tissue in their body, to transport the essential substances to the cell and to carry the waste substances from there. Another fluid is a lymph, or the tissue fluid is also used for the transport of the certain substances. The blood comprises of the fluid matrix, the plasma, and form the elements. The red blood cell, that is the RBCs, erythrocyte, white blood cell, WBCs, leukocyte, and the platelet are the thrombocyte form the elements. The blood of the human are the group into the AB, and the O system based on the presence and absence of the two surface antigen, that is the AB on the RBCs, and another blood group is also done based on the presence or absence of the another antigen called as a rhesus factor, that is the RH on the surface of RBCs. The space between the cell in the tissues contain the fluid derived from the blood called tissues. The tissue fluid called lymph is also similar to the blood except for the protein contain and form the elements. All vertebrates and a few vertebrates have the closed circulatory system. Our circulatory system consists of the muscular pump organ, heart, and a network of the vessels and the fluid blood. The heart has a 2 atria and the 2 ventricle. Cardiac musculature auto-excitable. The sinoatrial node, that is the SAN, generate the maximum number of the action potential per minute, that is the 70 to 75% per minute, and therefore it sets the pace in an activity of the heart. Hence it is called as a pacemaker. The action potential causes the atria and the ventricle to undergo the contraction, that is the systole, formed by the relaxation, that is the diastole. The systole forces the blood to move from the atria to the ventricle and the pulmonary arteria and the ventricles. The cardiac cycle is formed by the sequential event in the heart, which is a cyclically repeated is called as a cardiac cycle. The healthy person shows a 72% such a cycle per minute, and about the 70 ml of the blood is pumped out by each ventricle during a cardiac cycle, and it is called as a stroke or a beat volume. The volume of the blood pumped out by each ventricle or a heart per minute is called as a cardiac output, and it is equal to the product of the stroke volume and the heart rate, approximately 5 liters. The electrical activity of the heart can be recorded from the body surface by using the electrocardiograph, and recording is called the electrocardiogram, that is the ECG, which is of the clinical importance. We have completed double circulation, that is the 2 circulatory pathways, namely the pulmonary and the systemic are present. The pulmonary circulation start by the pumping of the oxygenated blood by the right ventricle, which is carried to the lungs where it is oxygenated and the returning to the left atrium. The systemic circulation start with the pumping of the oxygenated blood by the left ventricle to the aorta, which is carried to all body fluids, and deoxygenated blood from there is collected by veins and returned to the right atrium. Through the heart is auto-excited. Its function can moderated by the neural and the hormonal mechanisms. Thank you so much.